Kennedy Paynter from drafttech.com. And if you haven't been to this site, you need to visit. I mean, it's everything NFL draft that you could ever imagine. And we're going to zero in specifically on these Alabama guys that are expecting to be drafted in the first couple of rounds. Good morning, Kennedy.
How you doing?
Very well. Thanks for being with us this morning. I love your site. I've been there a number of times, kind of keeping up with the draft, and obviously here in Tuscaloosa, we want to focus in on some of the Alabama guys. And reading your big board, it's littered with guys in the top 30: Shaun Robinson, Reggie Ragland, and Jarran Reed, and then of course Henry's just right there on the edge of the top 30 at 33. Ryan Kelly's at 35, and also visiting your Twitter site, you're really high on these Alabama players.
I am definitely. I count 10 guys that might get drafted,
Wow.
all total. And I think Cyrus Jones is one of the most underrated players out there. He's only 5'9", so he's limited to, he's not going to play outside, but he can play in the slot like a Brandon Boykin type. And he also returns punts. So nobody's really talking about him, but he's a very solid defender, and I think he'll be a starter in the slot pretty much from the get-go.
Well, that's
but like you said, you can tell why your team was dominant last year, because they have, the two guys up front, Shaun Robinson and Jarran Reed, they're the two of the best defensive tackles in the league, if not the two best, coming into the league. So I would look for probably 3, maybe 4 in the first round.
I'm with you. I think there's a chance that either Kelly or Henry could slide into that first round in a moment. I want to get your opinion on those two guys in a moment, but let's begin with these 3 defensive players. Shaun Robinson, number 11 on the big board at Draft Tech, Reggie Ragland, number 19, and Jarran Reed, number 29. Let's start with Robinson, because I watched him in college. I know you've broken down his tape. Physically, he may be as gifted as any big defensive lineman in the draft. The knock on him is that maybe he doesn't have the intensity or bring it every play the way that they would like him to. But there's no denying this guy is a physical freak. Your thoughts on him, and where do you think he would be a good fit in the draft?
He's a 5 technique, I think, in the NFL, 3-4 defense playing on the outside, and then sub packages, he'll kind of drop in and play that defensive tackle rush guy. I don't think his motor was inconsistent. I think what was inconsistent with him was his pad level got too high, so he stood up on the snap. He'd stand up, and then he'd get pushed back. I think he just needs some coaching, and he needs to be a little more consistent at getting through his linemen rather than getting pushed back. And I think that's will come with a good defensive line coach. He is a physical freak. He's 6'4", 307, and he has a frame to add weight. So he has that body type you look for, that John Henderson type body type. And he could be a guy like Gerald McCoy at a 3 technique and a 4-3 defense if he fulfills his potential. But he has amazing amounts of potential. And I think he has a higher ceiling than Jarran Reed, but I think his floor is also lower than Jarran Reed. So I think Jarran Reed would be the safer prospect between the two.
All right, let's talk about Reed. Shaun's running buddy, best pals on the team, leaders on that defensive line. I saw you defending Reed on your Twitter account, and I'm with you. The people that say he's a run stopper only just haven't watched him play. He is very capable of pushing the pocket. Alabama used him specifically the way they needed him to be used, but I think he's a 3-down lineman in the NFL. You agree?
No, I do agree. What happened a lot, and people don't talk about this, is, and we'll talk about it in a minute with Reggie Ragland. On third down, a lot of time Reggie Ragland, because they didn't want him covering tight ends and slot receivers, so they would put him down at defensive end and let him rush. Well, the guy that came off the field was Jarran Reed, so he didn't have a whole lot of opportunities to rush the passer, and he wasn't even really coached to. They said, we want you to stuff the run, which he does very well. His lateral movement is amazing for someone at his size. The amount of times he was making tackles outside the hashes was just amazing. And if he has that sort of explosive ability to get to the hashes, then I really think that he can translate that into being a pass rusher in the NFL. So I think the arrow's pointing up for Jarran Reed. He's at least a run-stuffing nose tackle, and I think he has the upside of developing some pass rush and pushing the pocket as well.
Kennedy Paynter from drafttech.com, our guest, talking all things NFL draft with an emphasis on Alabama. Now let's get to Ragland. You've got him at Draft Tech has him at 19 on the big board. I've seen him slotted anywhere in that 15 to 22 range for the most part. What's not to like? I guess that's the way I'll ask it, because we know about his attitude, we know about his leadership skills, we know the kind of character that he has. I guess you mentioned it. There's a knock there as far as his ability in pass coverage, and maybe some teams are saying, where do you fit him in at? Can he play on the outside in pass rush situations? He's strictly an inside linebacker. What have you seen from Reggie Ragland?
I really like him. I really do. He's easily the top inside linebacker. I think he fits better into a 3-4 because you can have those two inside linebackers, and he's not going to be expected to cover as much sideline to sideline. The reason he was so good sideline to sideline wasn't because of his speed, but because of how well he finishes downhill and his instinct. He reads and reacts to a play maybe as fast as anybody in the draft this year. So he's a very smart player. He's a tough player, but I do worry about him trying to cover tight ends a little bit, especially now with these wide tight ends when they're splitting out and they're basically just big slot receivers. I worry a little bit, not because of his 40 time, but some of his other drills, he's a little bit stiff changing direction. But the reason he's so good coming downhill is because he doesn't really need to change direction. He picks an angle and he takes it. But I think because of his versatility, being able to rush the passer as well, he can rush from the inside. So you can have sort of a stunted blitz and send your inside linebacker, and he'd really excel at that. So I think that he's an instant starter in a 3-4 defense, and I think that he'd be a guy that would make the calls and could really be an emotional leader. So I'd certainly take him in the first round, and I'm not as worried about his 40 time as a lot of people are.
Kennedy, before we move on from these three, give me some teams that you think are really interested. First, in Shaun Robinson, some teams that are drafting in an area where you think he might go that are really interested in selecting him.
I think there's a need for defensive linemen in the NFL right now. The way the spread offense is in college, a lot of the defensive tackles are small. We don't have a lot of these big, freakish guys. And you saw with the Broncos, they had Malik Jackson and Wolf there in the middle, just pushing the pocket. And that's almost as, if not more important than Von Miller rushing from the outside. So, I think anybody is going to be looking for them. The Saints is a spot that I've seen them hit him mock to a lot, and it makes sense. The Saints need help in the middle. The Giants could use help in the middle there. I don't think either one of them is going to get into the top 10, but I think that the Saints and the Giants might be the ceiling for Robinson. I think Jarran Reed, because of the sort of perceived lack of pass rush skill, I think he might fall a little bit further. He might even fall into the 20s. I'm a Redskin fan. I take him at 21 happily if he was there. But I think he might drop a little further, and a lot of the teams late in the draft, even if he got to the Broncos, they'd scoop him up. So the Packers could use someone like Jarran Reed. So both of those guys, I would say there's probably half in the first round would be interested in taking a defensive tackle.
You said earlier you think there's a chance Alabama could have 4 first-round picks. So that tells me that the best opportunity for a fourth guy to move up into that first round would either be Ryan Kelly or Derrick Henry. Out of those two, who do you think most likely will be a number 1 pick?
That's a tough one. I would say Derrick Henry. Ryan Kelly would be very specific. I think it would be a team like the Colts, maybe even the Redskins, but there's only a couple teams that are looking for a center in the first round. The Colts are really a place to look. They need help on the interior, and they need leadership on the offensive line, too. They've been trying forever to try to get offensive linemen there. So 18 is maybe a surprise spot there. Derrick Henry needs a specific scheme. He needs a power scheme. He'll explode in the NFL if he gets in the right scheme, but he'll also kind of fade into, not saying if he's in a sort of zone scheme. He doesn't like to change direction. He needs big offensive linemen, open up a hole, and he'll take it and he'll run with it. So a team picking late in the draft, the Bengals run a power scheme. The Seahawks want to, but their offensive line isn't all that great, so I'm not sure how he'd do there. I would love him to be a Cardinal. He'd be great with the Cardinals game. Hugh Jackson, if he falls into the second round, Hugh Jackson wants to install that power run game, and he'd be great. He'd be a great fit there. So any team that has a power running system, the Panthers at number 30 is an option. But I think if I had to pick one, Derrick Henry, just because there's more teams at the bottom of the first round that are looking for that running back.
In Kelly's case, and we know center is a position, as you said, it's kind of draft specific. Center is not a really, even though it's a very important position on the offensive line, it's certainly not valued like a left tackle or even a right tackle as far as an offensive line is concerned. But from a center standpoint coming out of college, You've graded these drafts before. How does Kelly stack up? Is he one of the best NFL-ready centers coming out of college that you've seen?
Yeah, he reminds me of Travis Frederick, who was a late first-round pick from Dallas a couple of years ago and came right in and played like a Pro Bowler. I'm not sure Ryan Kelly is quite that polished yet, but he's tough and he's smart. He hasn't missed a whole lot of games. He's had a couple injuries, but he's just been consistent. And I think he's going to start in the NFL as long as he doesn't get hurt for 10 years. He's that guy that you can just bring him in. He's not going to be necessarily anything special, but he's going to be a guy like Nick Mangold or someone like that who's just there forever, and he plays well. You're not going to have to worry about him, and you just say, okay, I'm going to pick the center, and I'm not going to worry about it for the next 10 years. And I think that's the type of player he is, and he just comes to work and works, and he's going to be a leader of the offensive line. And I think a lot of teams at the beginning of the second round might be looking to scoop him up if he's not already taken.
One more thing on Henry, and then we're going to move on to some guys that are hoping to get drafted in the later rounds. Nick Saban had an interesting comment at Pro Day. He said, I want people to quit analyzing why he gets all these yards and just look at the fact that he gets all these yards. In other words, he was saying the production, why look for flaws all the time? This is a productive football player. He's done everything that we've asked him to do, running the ball, blocking in pass protection, catching it out of the backfield. Do you think he is overanalyzed? One thing because of the Alabama mystique and people wanting to kind of tear down Alabama players, and there's been a lot of talk about bust, really. Trent Richardson's been the only one. Ingram's been productive. Lacey's been productive. Yeldon had a good rookie year. What about Henry? Do you think people are harsh on him, just looking for negatives rather than just accepting the fact that he's a very productive running back?
I think the general media blows that up a little bit. I think you're right. And they're comparing him to Ezekiel Elliott, which is the problem. They're entirely different running backs. Right. Ezekiel Elliott is sort of this electric playmaker, and Derrick Henry's just going to get you the yards that are there, and he's going to run over a couple defenders along the way. And he has deceptive speed. I mean, he has that breakaway speed if he can get a hole. I think what people are a little bit worried about is if he doesn't have, and the Alabama offensive line did very well blocking for him, and if he doesn't have a scheme that blocks as well for him, he's going to struggle to find his own way, behind a bad offensive line. But if he goes somewhere that has a solid offensive line and opens up holes for him, he's going to, if there's any hole at all, he gains 4 yards, and that's what's special about him. And he reminds me of Brandon Jacobs in that way. If he can get to the line with a hole, he'll gain you 4 yards, and if you give him a big enough hole, he'll run over a safety, and he can take it the distance because he has that breakaway speed once he gets going. So I think the media blows it up a little bit, but I think the teams in a power scheme will definitely value him. But a team like the Broncos that runs his own scheme probably doesn't have a very high grade on him because he can't change direction the way they're going to want him to.
Kennedy Paynter, our guest from DraftTech.com. We're getting up against the clock a little bit, Kennedy, but a couple guys I want to ask you about. You mentioned Cyrus Jones already. You think he's undervalued. What about Kenyan Drake? Where do you see him fitting in this draft?
I think he's going to be 4th round-ish, maybe 5th round. People like him because he was stuck behind Henry and they didn't see him a whole lot. But he has great feet. He's always moving his feet. He can pass protect. He'd be a great third down back. And he's also help on special teams. So I wouldn't be surprised 4th, 5th round. And I think he might be a steal because, third down backs are hard to find, and he can also return kicks.
And Nick Saban was very upset that Jay Coker didn't get a combine invite. He said that he thought it was just huge oversight based on what Coker had accomplished in college. 14-0 as a starter, his size, his arm strength. He didn't get that combine invite, but he's working hard to try to get noticed. You think he's a draftable quarterback?
He's right there on the edge for me. He's widely been compared, and it's funny because he reminded me of this guy. He reminded me of Dan Orlovsky as soon as I started watching him. And then I realized I'm watching TV, and on ESPN they compared him to him. So he has a chance to stick as a backup. He's athletic enough, and he's a good leader. But I don't really see any starter upside for him. But he could definitely be a solid backup, sort of in the Colt McCoy role, where he's going to be helping in the meeting room. But he's not. I don't really ever see him with starter upside.
A guy that's off the radar, but I'm going to ask you about him because I know you follow it closely. He was never a star at Alabama, but you mentioned Cyrus Jones and what his value is, and, of course, he's a great special teams player, too. A linebacker that did really well at the Alabama Pro Day was Dylan Lee. Athletic, fast kid, can do some things in pass coverage. most likely a free agent guy, or you think he's a guy that somebody in the final round might take a flyer on and feel like they want to just go ahead and draft him?
Yeah, guys like that, I mean, it helps that he went to Alabama. If he's drafted, it's going to be in one of those late 7th round slots. But he does, he went to Alabama. He did get in. He did get some time. To be honest with you, I've only watched a little bit of him, and it's been when I've been watching the other guys. But again, when you go, there have been players that have never started and hardly played any snaps from these big schools, and just based on the fact that I believe he's 6'4", 250, somewhere in that range. When you're big and fast and you went to Alabama, and there's a reason you went to Alabama, NFL teams are going to take a flyer on you. So he'll be a priority free agent if he's not drafted, but he has a chance to stick just because of his measurables.
All right, one final question, non-Alabama related. Tennessee Titans have the number 1 pick. Obviously, they have a quarterback. I watched the Ole Miss Pro Day, and I know Joey Bosa is a good-looking football player, but I don't know how, if you're Tennessee, you pass on Laramie Tunsil. I was so impressed with watching him work the other day at the Ole Miss Pro Day on television. You agree, or you think they may go in a different direction?
Well, I do agree. I think they're probably leaning Tunsil at this point. I go back and forth, but it wouldn't be Bosa if it wasn't Tunsil. I think Bosa is overrated by the media. I don't even know if he's going in the top 5. I think it's going to surprise people. If there was somebody else in the number 1 pick, it would be Jalen Ramsey or Miles Jack. But you have to kind of think of the pairing. Am I going to pair a defensive blue chip player with a guy like Jason Spriggs in the 2nd round, which is a right tackle that I can plug in? Or do I want a left tackle and then a lesser defensive player? So if it was me, I would take Jalen Ramsey and I'd take a right tackle at the top of the 2nd round. But and I think, from what I'm hearing, Tennessee might be leaning that way. But when we get closer, I can give you a better idea of what I think about that first pick.
Well, terrific insight, and we look forward to having you on again prior to the draft. Kennedy, tell folks again where they can go find all the information on drafttech.com.
Yeah, drafttech.com. We have mock drafts we update weekly, and during the draft we actually update it live. So every single pick, the 7-round mock draft is updated live, and you can check it out there. I'm on Twitter. Just search Kennedy Paynter, Paynter, and you can find me there.
Good stuff. We appreciate it, man.
All right, thank you.